Chapter 24 The Trial of Paxsura Finale. It was a warm summer's morning as Jeremiah and Edenthiel were lying in bed together, having finally got a good night's sleep. And although the sun was out, Edenthiel still slept like a rock as her husband got dressed into some better clothes. He then made some coffee with a little creamer and sat down looking out the window. And as he sat there looking out the window, he reminisced on his time with Edenthiel and how she put herself in harm's way to save him, even if she couldn't do it by herself. He then remembered Natalia's words, "As it always will be," and how, like Natalia, Edenthiel truly loved him. Jeremiah then remembered the petty frustrations he had with his wife and how in the grand scheme of things it didn't matter. Sure, she wasn't perfect, but who is? Edenthiel still loved him, even if he couldn't always understand it. And so, Jeremiah thought about how he might show Edenthiel how much he loves her, apart from what her heart sense already knew. And while thinking, Edenthiel groaned awake and asked, "Baby?" Jeremiah then sat down on the bed next to Edenthiel and asked, "Yes, sugar?" Edenthiel then groggily asked, "You mind if I hold on to you?" "Sure." Jeremiah then lied back down as Edenthiel embraced him and held him close. She then whispered, "I missed you so much being taken away from you. Please don't leave me ever again." Jeremiah then kissed Edenthiel between the eyes. "I won't. I love you, baby." Someone then knocked on the door. "What now?" Jeremiah then got out of bed and asked, "Who is it?" The person on the other side of the door then answered, "Royal Police Force, Jeremiah McCreed Johnson has been compelled to testify in Paxsura's case." "Where's your warrant?" "Right here, signed by the judge. Jeremiah McCreed Johnson is hereby compelled to testify to the events leading up to and the events that occurred during himself in Paxsura on May 11, 2100. Failure to testify is a felony punishable either by fines or imprisonment. Now you can willingly get dressed and come along with me to the Royal Courthouse to fill out some paperwork, or you can show up there in handcuffs." "Well, I'm already dressed, so I'll come along with you." Jeremiah then looked back towards his wife before leaving the room. "I'll be right back, Sugar Cube." Jeremiah then went along with the officer to the Royal Courthouse to fill out some paperwork. And while there, Ellington said, "Thank you for arriving, Mr. Johnson. I presume you already know what you're being told to testify about by some unfriendly officers. But do you know why specifically the court has called you to testify?" Jeremiah then answered, "You tell me. Why does the court want me to testify?" "It's because you're a material witness in this case, and many witness testimonies before you have pointed to you as being a possible culprit. But if you testify, you can plead the fifth and no one can charge you for anything, especially things which you already have an imperial pardon for." "Is that a threat?" "No, I'm simply stating the law here. Now that the royal court has compelled you to testify, you either testify or you're going to prison for an actual crime, and not something fabricated like what Versifeth did you in for. She'll spend some sweet time in prison for taking hostages and kidnapping relatives of the royal family." "What do you want me to testify?" "Only what you know. Based on what the other witnesses and evidence have shown to the judge and jury, I will not need to tailor your testimony to prove her guilt. Her guilt speaks for itself. All you have to do is open your mouth." Old Man Kitsune. As the sun was shining on the courtyard, Victor meditated under a tree having some shade in order to not blind anyone with his fur. After all, his fur was such a bright white with cyan tips that it was like staring at the sun. Meanwhile, Titani was mastering more advanced spells of healing and vegetation manipulation, and communicating with animals. And as such Titani was practicing, Queen Ariana overlooked her training and said, "You've grown so much since I've last seen you. The centuries-old foxman has taught you well." Titani then gave a curtsy in Ariana's direction. "Thank you, Your Majesty." Ariana then gracefully said, "You know we still know each other personally, right?" Did we not know each other since you were small? Titania's feathered wings then fluttered with warmth as she answered, We did. You've changed so much too. You were just a princess back then, but now you're the queen of an entire queendom. Ariana then looked gently into Titania's lavender eyes. And you've changed too, Titania. You've grown so much into someone truly wonderful. And I honestly think your father exiling you was the best thing he could have done for you. Titania then remembered she still had 2 sisters, Rhea and Lisa. And out of curiosity and concern, she asked, I think so. How are my sisters? Victor then finished his prayer and meditation rule and answered softly, Tragedy. Titania then faced Victor, almost blinded by the sunlight reflecting off his bright fur. Titania then fidgeted her wings and pointed ears as her heart rate rose a little. Sorry, what happened? Victor then crossed his arms and tried not to make eye contact. They have become like their father in the Dark Mage. I have little more to say about them. Titania then went silent, facing the ground in melancholy as Victor continued. I'm sorry, Titania. I did not want to tell you a lie and give you false hope. So I had to tell you the truth. Titania then whispered, Thank you anyway. You're welcome. Some people are just so set in their ways that saving them from themselves is beyond my abilities, even with 900 years of practice. So I left feeling there was nothing more I could do. Titania's eyes then started to glow slightly magenta with the small radiation of magical energy from her wings. How could you just give up on them like that? Isn't apathy against your monastic vows? Victor then stood unfazed by the presence of Titania's magical energy. It's not apathy, Titania. I do what I am able, and there are just some things that are beyond my ability. And I have come to recognize there are some people only God can save. And your sisters are those kinds of people. Even Ariana stood somewhat shocked before she muttered, I think so is my mother. Victor then asked out of curiosity, seeing Titania was done talking. How so? Ariana then looked confused. She said, My mother, Queen Paxsura, is hardly recognizable as the same person. I remember growing up seeing her only as controlling and cruel, enforcing her will as queen. Now she acts like a saint someone would write icons of, and I have no clue why. Why has she undermined her own corrupt judges, sending her former servants to prosecute them? She rebuilds entire churches she once persecuted. And now she's given up all her personal assets to help those in need while in prison? It makes no sense to me. Victor then folded his paw hands with his tails down. Perhaps some things don't need to make sense, and we should just appreciate good things as they come. It is also good to hear your mother isn't the tyrant she used to be. Ariana then slightly clenches her hands on her sundress. Perhaps it is, although I still can't understand it. This Paxsura is nothing like the woman I knew as my mother. And if she could have such kindness for absolute strangers, how come she could never show such kindness to me, her own daughter? Victor then stood up straight and looked Ariana in the face with his piercing fluorescent cyan eyes. I think we should stop here before we get sidetracked and start brooding about things that aren't true. I can't fathom it either, but just because we can't understand something doesn't mean it's wrong. Perhaps you should ask her instead of speculating and coming up with all sorts of wild theories. Okay, Fox Boy, if you're so wise with your 9 tails, tell me why someone like my mother would turn herself around so much. I can't say for certain, but St. Moshe the Blacktail's life might give us some insight. Ariana then glared at Victor with her arms crossed. And what does this Tanuki saint have to do with my mother? But Victor remained stoic. It means she, like Moshe, probably never knew how to love anyone, because all she knew was fear, power, and dominance. Moshe and Paxsura are also raised by abusive parents, with Empress Diana arguably more abusive and uncaring than Moshe's slave master or bandit gang. And perhaps like Moshe, it wasn't violence or dominance that broke her, but the love of ordinary people. And like ordinary people, it's oftentimes more difficult to love those closest to us than strangers. That still doesn't excuse what my mother did. Victor's eyes went soft seeing Ariana like this, as his voice somewhat softened as well. I know it doesn't. But perhaps it gives some insight on how we can move on with it, but brooding about the past isn't going to help. If your mother is to be convicted guilty and executed, at least make the effort to forgive her. Otherwise, you're just drinking poison hoping it heals you. Queen Oriana then tensed up before solemnly saying, I know what you want me to do, but I'm not sure if I have the strength to do it. With all I've been through, please pray for me that I do the right thing, because I can't do this on my own. Victor then made the sign of the cross with his right paw hand. Then I shall. And now, if you don't mind, I'll be paying my mother a visit. Ariana then left to visit her mother, but feeling the weight of everyone's things she's done to her, she struggled to keep her composure. Ariana that said as her voice shook, Mother, I can barely force myself to look at you with everything you've done to me, my brother, and my father. And now you show kindness? Why did you do this if never before? Paxsura could not lift her face to see her own daughter as Ariana demanded, Answer me! Paxsura then looked at her daughter with meekness and answered, It's because only now do I realize how horrible I've been to you and our people, and I deserve every punishment for what I've done. When expecting her own mother to be proud, Ariana stood there shocked at what she just heard her own mother say. Ariana then asked, But why haven't you shown me this side of yourself before? It's because I didn't wish to see it. Your grandmother raised me to be an extension of herself, and I saw love as weakness. I was forced to be someone I wasn't, and it damaged me for almost my whole life, and now I realize what it has done to you. If I had known what I was doing sooner, I would have never done the things I've done. So with what little power I have left, I chose to use it for good. I understand it isn't much, but in the states I am in, there isn't much more I can do even though I desire it. Tears then started to gather around Ariana's eyes as she tried to hold herself together, and seeing the emotion in her daughter's eyes, Paxsura said, Don't feel sorry for me. This is my just reward for the life I've lived. I destroyed the lives of so many people, and now it's time I pay with my own. Then I forgive you. The final testimony. Just as the trial was about to start, Queen Paxsura started thinking to herself, So, the final day of my trial has come, and now I must face the one who started it all, my son and my own self. You know I rightly deserve the blame, and for it, I will admit my own guilt. You do not deserve to suffer in my place for my own selfish means. After all, that's a real mother that I failed to be able to do, wouldn't she? The lie of a life I've lived. One of self-importance, seeing everyone else is below me, even you. But now I see you as more noble than all the nobility, and I, the greatest of all, has become least. For I am not a lowly village chief of sinners, but the empress of them. If you shall condemn me justly for what I have done, do so and have no regrets and avenge your sister and my people. But if you should show me mercy, I will accept it and live with myself in exile, unworthy to be the one people once called queen. And once the jury had arrived and got settled, the judge spoke. Today marks the final day of Queen Paxsura's trial for the crimes in which she is accused. The prosecution may call its final witness. And so Jeremiah took to the stand, facing Paxsura and Paxsura facing him. But it was neither hate nor vengeance, but rather understanding. Despite everything they had put each other through, they were still each other and perhaps changed for the better. With the look into each other's eyes, a once powerful queen and her common son, yet seeing each other as equals, no emotion rose within them. Jeremiah then thought to himself, I don't hate you, but I know what I have to do, and I know with that look in your eye that you understand. Prosecutor Ellington then said, State your name and occupation. My name is Jeremiah McCreed Johnson, and I am but a simple weaponsmith and farmhand, and I intend to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Tell us what happened between you and the defendant on May 11th, 2100. It was a day like any other. I came to see my fiancée, now my wife, at the festival, and for a second reason, to tell my stepmother that I moved on. I didn't care anymore what enmity we had between each other anymore, so I only planned on showing up to tell Paxsura to her face that I moved on and then leave with my wife. But when 7 nobles showed up and attempted to kill me as I was leaving, I shot them in self-defense and Umbriel pardoned me, with an imperial pardon because he's a just man and knew I was innocent, and would rather let 7 guilty nobles go free than an innocent person be punished unjustly. I had no intention of fulfilling the illegal bounty contract on her head, but simply took them as part of a sting against rogue elements within the Zolshuran government on their behalf, to catch the person who issued the contracts in the act. I did not fulfill them because I knew it would be illegal, and it would probably start a civil war, and that's something I couldn't allow myself to do, even if I hated Paxsura on a personal level. I take it you were a bounty hunter before your current occupation, is that correct? Yes, my primary domain was Droxus, and for most dangerous dragonborn as a lawman. What was your history before the events of May 11, 2100 with Paxsura? She was my stepmother, and forced my father to marry her so she could get an heir. She treated me merely as an object to be disposed of when I no longer benefited her, and made my sister Ariana merely an extension of herself and her legacy. I hated her because she took away my sister's childhood, because I couldn't protect my sister from her. So rather than let the mental and physical abuse force my sister into becoming an extension of herself, I tried getting the authorities involved, but they were all bribed and controlled by her. The only help I had was the sheriff, who never accepted bribes from her, and Mr. Whitetail, who had been a victim of organized crime and was willing to help me. And because she's not only put my sister and myself in mortal danger, but also my own town, I had to take justice into my own hands because no one else would. I shot her with my father's revolver when she attempted to whip my sister for disobeying her. I just couldn't let her abuse anymore, especially on my own sister, and neither could my best friend Natalia and her father, Mr. Whitetail, who got the feds involved and dragged Paxsura away after surviving a gunshot wound. It made forgiving Paxsura on May 11, 2100 one of the hardest things I ever had to do, knowing everything she's did to the people I loved. Thomas Wright then thought to himself, "So you admit you were the true culprit all along. I'm going to have a field day having you sent to the gallows instead of Paxsura." Prosecutor Ellington then asked, "If you hated Paxsura so much, how come you didn't kill her when you had the chance?" Jeremiah then answered, "I didn't kill her because it wasn't right. She was already defeated and my sister taking her place. I know she'll do the right thing and either lock Paxsura up for life or send her to the gallows in Caroline. And I'm not the kind of person who ever does revenge killing." "And why did you become a bounty hunter?" "I did it to save the people from people like Paxsura. Most common high-value targets assigned me were Droxus Dragonborn royals that abused their subjects. So, when bounties showed up for Paxsura's head and multiple Selenese rulers that abused their subjects, I was naturally curious." Prosecutor Ellington then faced the jury and said, "I think we now can see from the defendant's own son the real Paxsura she hid from the public, a criminal so insidious she caused the upstanding citizen to have to take justice into his own hands. And now the veil is torn away, and we see the real Paxsura for who she really is. Do not deny the people of this queendom their due justice." The judge then said, "The defense may now cross-examine the witness." Thomas Wright then asked Jeremiah, "You said your testimony that you committed vigilante justice. Did you just commit to committing a felony?" Ellington then said, "Objection, the alleged crime did not happen in the Lunar Queendom, and therefore we cannot prosecute the defendant for the alleged crime in which he was never even prosecuted for." The judge then said, "Objection sustained." Ellington then said, Did you not admit to killing multiple members of the royal family, which you also had a bounty contracts? Ellington then said, Objection. The court has already ruled this was an act of self-defense. The judge then said, after seeing Thomas fail to come with another counter, Objection sustained. Thomas then asked Jeremiah, Did you not admit you had a personal vendetta against Paxsura? Ellington then said, Objection, leading witness on direct examination. The judge then said, Objection sustained. The more and more objections were sustained in favor of the prosecution, until eventually Ellington asked, Your Honor, may we end this charade of questioning? It is clearly not going anywhere. Finally, looking like he had no more questions to ask Jeremiah, Thomas said, The defense is finished cross-examining the witness. The judge then said, The jury will now review the evidence and testimonies of witnesses and come to a verdict. And so the jury went into a private room, in the world's longest hour where the entire queendom stood still. The jury returned to the benches as the judge pronounced the verdict, saying, The jury finds the defendant not guilty of first-degree murder, sacrilege, or treason. However, the jury finds you guilty of bribery, corruption, and attempted second-degree murder on a member of the royal family. You are hereby stripped of all your royal titles, assets, and sentenced to life in prison. Do you have any last words you want the world to hear before you spend the rest of your life behind bars? Paxsura then answered, Yes, and if there's anything I deserve for the life I have lived, it's this. Take me away. And upon hearing the news, Governor Vixarinus said to the commander of the new Confederate Republic of South Selene, We now know what we have to do. Launch the air raids and prepare for secession. The Vertok Empire and reprobates are going to pay for what they did to us. Did you know this? Saint Moshe the Blacktail. This is a reference to a lore character, as a fictional saint is a reference to a real-world saint venerated in the Orthodox and Catholic Church known as Saint Moses the Black / Saint Moses the Ethiopian. Even the part about Saint Moshe the Blacktail being a slave and part of a bandit gang was inspired by Saint Moses' life as a former slave and ringleader of a bandit gang, and later repented of his life and became a desert monk. The meaning of Paxsura's name. Although Ceylonese is a fictional language, Paxsura's name in Ceylonese actually means the peacemaker, relating to her eventual demise in making peace with her enemies and the life she's lived. Hence, if there's anything that describes the hopeful tragedy of Paxsura throughout books 1 and 2, it's repentance, forgiveness, and making peace with one's enemies. The phrase, writing icons. This is not a grammatical error, but a reference to an actual theological term. This is because making icons was a form of writing a work of theology before wide-scale literacy existed. Before the printing press, it was extremely labor-intensive to copy books, especially the Bible, which contains approximately 780,000 words, which, while the average length novel only has about 80,000 words. And to copy a novel would cost as much as a whole farm just in labor, as well as if so few people could read anyway, making it quite an expensive and not very useful endeavor. This is why icons and statues were so prevalent throughout Christian history, because they depict theology that would be universally understood. Hence many medieval cathedrals were designed as enormous galleries, depicting the theology of the church and were colloquially referred to as the Bible for the poor. Hence icons and statues served both a practical and spiritual purpose towards the mostly illiterate population. And even if someone could read, it often meant that they had to share a single Bible or a fragment of the Bible because of the sheer expense of it. Hence, sola scriptura, as proposed by Martin Luther, literally did not exist before him, because most people wouldn't be able to read the Bible anyway. Therefore, theology was primarily expressed through iconography and apostolic tradition, which included the Bible as a key part of it.